This is the second chapter for your A math, and this second chapter on equations and inequalities essentially is an extension of your E math quadratic equations and the very first A math topic on quadratic functions. So we are still dealing with quadratic functions, but we will be exploring uh, um, more of the nature of roots on the idea of discriminant, and it will be extended into some simultaneous equation and quadratic inequalities. So, so you will find a certain part of it, there's an overlap. You already learned certain things. So we're going to begin this chapter on the solving of quadratic equation by completing square or the quadratic formula. So for this part, obviously you have done it in your E math as well. So by completing square or by quadratic formula. Technique-wise, it's going to be the same here, except that there will be some explanation question. So I'm going to use example 1 to recap the technique. So in example 1, we have one quadratic equation, and I'm going to be solving it by completing square, and I'm going to be solving it by the quadratic formula. So either way, whichever way that I'm going to be doing it, I should be expecting same answers. Okay, so let's recap. How do you solve this equation by the complete square? So if you still remember, the requirement for complete square will be the coefficient of x squared has to be 1. So in our case, the coefficient is 4. So I actually got to divide both sides by 4. So since we are dealing with an equation, not an expression, I can just divide by 4. Okay, so just know that this is an equation, so I can divide both sides by 4. So in such a case, right, I'll be getting something like this. 0 divided by 4 will be a 0. So just take note, if it's an expression, so this is called an expression. So if this is an expression, you cannot divide by 4. You can only factorize out 4. So there's a difference between a quadratic expression and a quadratic equation. So this is an expression. So this is an equation because there's an equal to 0, whereby actually you can solve for x. So in an expression, you cannot solve for x. So that's the difference. So in an expression, you couldn't divide by 4. You can only factorize out 4. In an equation, you can divide both sides by 4. So that's one of the common mistakes sometimes. So upon dividing by 4, you will achieve the coefficient of x squared to be 1. So then we will start our completing square process. So the process will involve taking the coefficient of x divided by 2. So in a way, I will take the coefficient divided by 2 and I square it, and I will be doing this. So I'm going to be doing this. Okay, this part will be getting you a x minus 1 squared. So that's the perfect square that we had. And this part, you punch calculator, it will give you a minus 3/4. So from here, you solve by bringing over the 3/4 by taking the square roots. So when you take square root, there will be the positive roots and the negative root. So using the positive root, I bring over the minus 1. Using the negative square roots, I also bring over the minus 1. So this will be the two solutions that I would have gotten. So that is the method by completing square. So it's almost the same like what you did for your E-math as well. So for the quadratic formula, that's the same thing. So for the quadratic formula, make sure you know what is your ABC. And if you are using the quadratic formula, you will need to substitute. Show the substitution clearly. So that is required for method marks. So plug in your ABC correctly. Okay, so for those of you, some of you, I think some of you will prefer to key everything in your calculator. So usually I wouldn't do that. So usually I will key this part in my calculator. So it's the same format that I will do in my eMath. So I will punch this out and then I will get a 48. So from here, I will get my two possible answers. One will be the positive, and I will be getting another answer. So you punch out these two possible answers. It should tally with the one that you've gotten from your complete square. So unless stated, if it's not mentioned about the accuracy, you will leave it in 3SF. Sometimes you will be required to leave it in 2DP. That depends whether the question has state any accuracy or not. So this part has nothing new. So in example one, is more like your execution of technique. So in the execution, you're expected to have 100% execution, no careless mistake. So like I mentioned, it's very similar to the eMath quadratic equation, except that right now, you must be able to explain. So you must be able to link the method to explaining things like this. So you need to be able to explain why this quadratic equation has no solution. So you can approach it in a complete square manner. You can approach it in the quadratic formula manner. So it's actually up to you. So I'm going to show the two approach. So the first method that I'll be showing by the complete square. So I'm going to use the complete square idea to explain. So in order to use a complete square idea to explain, you execute your typical steps for complete square. So execute your typical steps. And then you try to solve as per normal. So at this section, right, you can start the explanation from here. So from here, you can start the explanation. So the explanation will be something like anything that is being squared is always positive. A squared function is always positive. So because of this, it's not possible for the square function to be equal to a negative value. That's why, because of this equation has no solution. So you can explain from here. Or you can continue to try to take square roots. Or you can continue to try to take square roots. Okay, and then if you try to punch calculator, you realize that if you calculated the square root of a negative 3/4, it's returning you a math error. So then you can explain that since this is not applicable, it is not applicable because the calculator return you a math error. So the equation has no solution. So you can explain it this way. Okay, so let's go to the second method. So second method, I'm going to use the quadratic. I'm going to use the quadratic formula. So show your quadratic formula clearly, as if you're solving for it. So always be writing out the quadratic formula. That will be the method marks. So as you try to work out, you realize that you got a -3. So taking square root of a -3 is something not applicable. So again, you can explain that. Because if you try to punch calculator, you realize that you're not getting you get a math error for square root of a -3. So since this is not applicable, so so this equation has no solution. So in fact, there is still a third method. The third method will utilize the idea of discriminant. But because at this stage, you have not got the idea of discriminant, so I will not be using the discriminant method. So otherwise, the discriminant method can be the third method. So for the execution, for E-math, you do not need to explain much. But for A-math, yes, you will need to explain. So you can explain with the complete square approach, or you can explain with the quadratic formula approach. So it's almost like solving it. It's just that you end up with not something that's not possible.